I was preparing for the future, and she was preparing to escape. I was building our future, and she was looking for a way to escape. I had this nagging feeling that my wife was gearing up to file for divorce. So I took some precautions and moved my assets around. 1 week later, she actually did file, then pulled back when things didn't go the way she'd clearly expected. Hey folks, I've been lurking around here for a while, reading all these stories, never thinking I'd end up writing one of my own. But life has a funny way of smacking you in the face when you least expect it. I've been carrying this weight for months, and it's time I got it off my chest. Just to set the record straight, I've never been the paranoid type or someone who jumps to conclusions. My wife, let's just call her S, and I had been together for 7 years, married for 5. From where I stood, everything seemed pretty solid. Sure, we had our typical highs and lows like any couple, but there was never anything that set off major alarms for me. Honestly, for most of our time together, we were that couple. The ones who just click. We had goofy inside jokes, silly debates over what movie to watch, and a rhythm that felt natural. She'd plan these fancy date nights, and I'd show up with her favorite takeout when she had a rough day. It all felt easy, like we had love figured out, which is exactly why what happened later hit me so hard. About 5 months ago, something started to shift. It was small stuff at first, the kind of things you'd probably overlook unless you were really paying attention. She suddenly became glued to her phone, even taking it with her when she walked into the kitchen or folded laundry. Before that, her phone would just lie on the coffee table for hours, and she didn't care if I picked it up. One time, I made a lighthearted joke, like, "What's going on? You running a secret spy agency now?" She laughed and said, "Nah, work's just been blowing up lately. Alright, no big deal." But a few days later, she put a password on it. That threw me off because she'd never bothered with one before. When I casually asked about it, she gave some vague explanation about online security and hackers. I didn't push the issue. I didn't want to seem suspicious, but it definitely felt weird. And that wasn't the end of it. She also started taking her calls in private, which was totally new. She didn't even try to be sneaky about it. Her phone would ring and she'd say, "Oh, I'll just grab this real quick," then vanish into the bedroom or step out onto the porch. And when I asked who it was, she'd casually reply, "Just someone from work." Then came the face-down phone thing. I never even knew that was a thing until one night. I reached over to hand her something and she quickly moved her phone out of the way. It was subtle, one of those blink and you miss it moments, but it stuck with me. The distance between us started to grow. And it wasn't just about the phone anymore. She started feeling disconnected. Conversations that used to flow like nothing now felt awkward, like pulling teeth. Anytime I tried to talk about the future, like, "Hey, where should we go for our anniversary?" Or, "Think it's time to start saving for a new car?" she'd just give me a half-hearted, "Yeah, we'll see," and then quickly change the subject. Then came the turning point. It was a regular Wednesday, nothing out of the ordinary. She told me she was grabbing coffee with a friend after work. Totally normal, she does that now and then. By coincidence, I was running errands nearby and thought, why not surprise her? She'll probably find it cute. But when I got there, she wasn't with anyone. She was outside the coffee shop, pacing back and forth with her phone pressed to her ear. I stayed in my car. Something about the way she was talking felt serious. I wasn't trying to spy, but I caught bits and pieces. Phrases like, "It's almost ready," and "starting fresh soon." My stomach dropped. I couldn't make out exactly what she was talking about, but it didn't sound like drama with a coworker or a friend. Felt bigger, like something she'd been plotting. Later that night, I asked her how the coffee date went, trying to keep things light. She gave me this whole story about her friend venting about her boyfriend. Caught me off guard. I just kind of stared at her. "What do you mean?" I asked. She shrugged. Then, out of nowhere, she brings up something totally unrelated. "I think we should keep all our important stuff in one place. Passwords, documents, account info, just in case something happens." I didn't know how to respond. We'd never talked about anything like that before, and with everything else going on, the timing felt off. I asked, trying to sound casual, "What kind of emergency are you talking about?" She shrugged again. "It's just smart, right? I mean, what if something happens to one of us? Or we need to make a quick financial decision. And yeah, on the surface it sounded reasonable, but the way she said it didn't sit right with me. It felt too smooth, like she'd rehearsed the whole thing and had been waiting for the right moment to drop it. I nodded and said something like, yeah, that makes sense, but inside? My gut was screaming. Why now? Why was she suddenly so interested in getting our finances in order when up until now we'd always kept things pretty relaxed and separate? That night, her words kept looping in my head and I couldn't stop trying to decode what she really meant. Was this just her being a responsible adult, or was I reading too much into it? But then I thought back to the secret of phone calls, the strange conversation I overheard at the cafe, and just how distant she'd been lately. It was all starting to add up and I really didn't like where it seemed to be heading. Up to that point, I hadn't taken any action. I was just keeping my eyes open. Then, a few days later, she brought it up again. We were in the kitchen, I was throwing together a sandwich, she was scrolling through her phone, and out of nowhere she said, have you thought more about organizing the bank stuff? Like, do you know where all the account info is? I paused mid-slice, set the knife down, and turned toward her. I tried to keep it light but direct. Okay, seriously, what's going on? You've been bringing up money stuff a lot lately. Is there something I should know about? She finally looked up from her screen, caught off guard that I was actually calling her out. No, nothing's wrong, she said quickly, and the way she rushed it made me chuckle a little even though I didn't find it funny. I just think it's smart, you know, for emergencies. Emergencies? I asked, raising an eyebrow. Like what exactly? She just shrugged, face totally blank. I don't know. Life stuff. It's not a big deal. I promise. I just think it's something we should stay on top of. Her answer was so vague it made me even more uneasy. I nodded, pretended to drop it, but inside my gut was twisting. It didn't sound like a simple suggestion anymore. It felt like there was something she wasn't telling me and I couldn't put my finger on it. The next day, while she was at work, I decided to dig a little. I logged into her joint account and started checking recent activity. What I found caught me off guard. Over the past month, there were a handful of small, random transactions. Nothing major, just odd. Small amounts here and there, but they didn't line up with bills, groceries, or anything routine. It looked like she'd been slowly pulling money out and I couldn't figure out why. I thought about confronting her, but something told me to hold off. If I was wrong, I'd look like an insecure idiot. But if I was right, I needed to play this carefully. It was weighing heavy on me, so I reached out to someone I trust, an old buddy from college who's now a lawyer. I laid out everything I'd found, trying not to sound like I was spinning a wild conspiracy. After I'd finished, he said, look, I'm not saying anything shady's definitely going on, but you're not crazy for wanting to be prepared. If you're worried about your assets, now's the time to protect them. Better to be safe than sorry. He walked me through a few steps I could take to keep my finances safe if things did go sideways. Honestly, it felt weird, like I was bracing for disaster without knowing if it was really coming. But the more I thought about it, the more it seemed like the smart move. If she was planning something and I was starting to believe she was, I needed to protect myself. It wasn't a decision I made lightly. This wasn't just about money. It was about everything we'd built together. I kept flashing back to our wedding day, those late-night talks about our dreams and all our weird little in-jokes that only made sense to us. How the hell did we end up here? Was this really what our marriage had come to? Taking these steps felt like waving the white flag, like I was officially giving up on the trust we used to have. That night, while she was out, I sat down at my desk and opened my laptop. My hands were shaking as I started digging through everything: bank accounts, investments, the house deed. Every document I pulled up felt like a betrayal, but there was this voice in the back of my head that kept telling me this wasn't about revenge. It was about protecting myself. I didn't want to hurt her, I just couldn't shake the feeling that if I didn't act now, I'd regret it. So I started putting together a list. What could I move? How could I do it without setting off any red flags? And as I typed, I felt this heavy pressure sitting on my chest. I had trusted this woman completely for years, and now here I was, trying to outmaneuver her like she was the enemy. Then I picked up the phone and called my mom. I didn't tell her everything, just that I needed a favor. Can you hold on to a few things for me? Just for a while? It's nothing bad, I promise. I just need to be cautious. She was quiet for a few seconds. I'm sure she was trying to read between the lines. Are you okay? She finally asked, her voice tight with concern. Yeah, I lied. It's just a precaution, that's all. Nothing to worry about. She didn't press me on it, but I could hear the hesitation in her voice when she said, of course, sweetheart. Whatever you need. I hung up the phone feeling a weird mix of guilt and relief. I hated dragging her into this, but just knowing she was in my corner gave me some sense of balance in what had become a whirlwind of uncertainty. By the time S got home, I was already deep into setting things in motion. I'd quietly transferred most of our assets, cash, investments, even the house, into my mom's name. I left just enough in our shared account to keep things looking normal, but everything else was locked up tight. She didn't notice a thing. Walked in like it was any other day, kissed me on the cheek, and asked if I felt like watching a movie. I kept a straight face, but inside I was completely unraveling. Part of me felt terrible, like I just stabbed her in the back. But another part of me, it felt like I could finally breathe. Like I was finally taking back control of a situation that had been slipping through my hands for way too long. So for the next few days, I kept up the act like nothing had changed. I didn't want her sensing anything was off. And honestly, she seemed more content than usual, almost unusually upbeat. But instead of putting me at ease, it only made my gut twist harder. If she was hiding something, she was doing a damn good job of keeping it under wraps. But the one thing that really stuck with me? She never mentioned money again. Not once. Not even after I brought it up before. It was like the whole subject had vanished into thin air. At first, I chalked it up to me being paranoid. Maybe she just thought it wasn't worth bringing up anymore. But the more I thought about it, the clearer it became she was avoiding it. Like she was scared of what might happen if she said anything. Every now and then I'd catch her looking at me. Like she was reading my face, trying to figure out if it was safe to speak. But the second I noticed, she'd quickly look away, pretending to be absorbed in her phone, the TV, or whatever book she had nearby. It was subtle, but it was happening. It honestly felt like she was waiting for me to reopen the conversation, not wanting to be the one to do it herself. And the silence? That only made my anxiety worse. She wasn't the type to just drop something important, so the way she was skating around it, it felt intentional. If she was testing the waters, she sure as hell wasn't jumping in. And if she was waiting for a signal, I wasn't about to give her one. Whatever she had planned next, I had to stay one move ahead. I could feel something was on the horizon, but I didn't know what it was or when it would hit. All I could do was brace myself. That night, I went over everything again, making sure the setup was airtight. I combed through the paperwork, reviewing all the asset transfers to my mom. The house, the accounts, everything legally in her name now, sealed under an uncontested trust. I even called her just to confirm she had every document in order. 3 weeks went by and things stayed weirdly normal. Too normal. She was being sweeter, more affectionate. Started chatting about random stuff, work, dinner plans, stuff like that. It threw me off considering how distant she'd been for months, barely engaging in anything deeper than surface-level conversation. And part of me started wondering, had I blown this whole thing out of proportion? Maybe all her strange behavior was just stress or something I didn't fully understand. But then, one Saturday night, out of nowhere, she turned off the TV, sat me down, and hit me with the words no one ever wants to hear, "We need to talk." My stomach dropped. I already knew what was coming. "I think we should get a divorce," she said, calm as can be, like she'd been rehearsing it for weeks. There was no anger. No tears. Just this cold, emotionless tone, like she was announcing we were out of milk. I stared at her, totally blindsided, while she laid out her reasons. She needed space, wanted to rediscover herself, felt like she'd lost her identity in our marriage. The usual breakup script, none of which actually explained anything. But then she added something that hit a different nerve. "I've made a lot of sacrifices for you," she said, "and I don't think you've ever really appreciated them. I deserve more." That stung. It wasn't just that she wanted to leave, it was how she framed it, like I owed her something. Like everything that had gone wrong was on me and she was just claiming what she was entitled to. As I sat there trying to make sense of it, one question kept bouncing around my head. Why now? And then she gave me the missing piece. "A friend of mine has been helping me see things more clearly," she said, still avoiding eye contact. A friend. I stayed quiet, just letting her talk, but my thoughts were racing. Who was this friend? Why were they involved in my marriage? The way she said it, it wasn't casual. It sounded like someone had been coaching her, giving her a playbook. Like this wasn't just a choice, this was a move she'd been planning. And the more she kept talking about everything she'd supposedly sacrificed, the more I started doubting the whole narrative. Sacrifices? What sacrifices? She always said she was happy. I bent over backward to give her the life she wanted, and not just financially. When she asked to move closer to her office, I agreed, even though it meant I'd spend twice as long commuting. When she wanted to go on that ridiculously expensive yoga retreat, I made sure we could afford it, even gave up a vacation I'd been excited about so she could go. I backed her through 3 different career changes, told her to go for it, take the risk, because I wanted her to be happy. I always thought being a good husband meant putting her needs ahead of mine whenever I could. And it's not like I was some cold, checked-out partner, I was present. I never forgot her birthday, and I always remembered those little things she randomly said she liked. When she said she felt stuck in a rut, I was the one who brought up the idea of date nights. I'd listen while she vented about work, her friends, or issues with her family. I didn't always get it perfect, sure, but I made a real effort. That's why it stung so bad when she hit me with that whole "I deserve more" speech. I couldn't even pretend to take it seriously. The truth is, it wasn't something I did or didn't do that had her all twisted up. She was going through something on her own. Maybe it had to do with that guy she kept casually bringing up, or maybe it was something else entirely. But the woman sitting across from me wasn't the same person I had married. And there was no way I was about to let her rewrite the story of our marriage just to justify whatever new direction she was heading in. I didn't push back in that moment. I just nodded and said something neutral like, "If that's really how you feel, then I guess we should figure out what happens next." She looked kind of thrown off by how calm I was, like she expected me to argue, beg, or make a scene. But honestly, I was already in a different headspace. I needed to find out who or what had caused this calculated shift in her behavior. People don't just wake up one day and decide to blow up their life. This had been building, and I wasn't about to get blindsided again. Right after that conversation, she went back to her new apartment, and by Tuesday, I got hit with the divorce papers. And let me tell you, she wasn't just ending the relationship. She wanted everything. Half the house, my savings, my investments, the car, everything. She was going after it all. And to top it off, there were these vague spousal support demands that made zero sense, especially considering how much she was making. It honestly felt like she expected me to just hand over everything I'd built. At first, I figured she was just angry and trying to be spiteful. But the way those demands were worded, so specific, so aggressive, it felt like someone had coached her. That's when I decided to start digging. I couldn't just come out and ask her who she was talking to, so I had to get smart about it. I started with her social media. She hadn't blocked me, and while she didn't post a lot, I combed through her tagged photos and the comments, trying to spot anything new. That's when I noticed a pattern. This guy named Brandon kept liking and commenting on her stuff. Nothing over the top, but enough to catch my eye. His profile was public, so I clicked. At first glance, he seemed like a regular guy in his 33s working in marketing. But the more I scrolled, the more things started clicking. There was this one picture he posted from the same cafe where I'd seen her a few weeks earlier, the same day I'd overheard her talking about starting fresh. My gut twisted as I kept scrolling. There were little hints, a comment on one of her photos that said, "You've got this," and a selfie that looked like it was taken inside her new place. It wasn't hard proof, but it definitely raised red flags. I didn't know exactly what to do with that info, but I knew I couldn't just sit on my hands. I kept thinking about that comment she made about a friend who'd been helping her through stuff. I needed to know who that really was. So I reached out to someone we both knew, Lisa. Rachel and my wife had been close for years, so I figured if anyone had a clue, it'd be her. I kept the convo casual at first, just asked if she'd talked to my wife lately or if anything seemed off. Rachel shut it down quick, said she didn't know anything about this mystery friend and brushed off the whole idea. I tried asking a few more direct questions, but she got real defensive and said she couldn't help. The whole thing felt rushed, like she didn't want to get involved. But I wasn't ready to drop it, so I reached out to another friend, Tara. Same approach. I told her I was just trying to make sense of what was going on. She was hesitant, dodging my questions with vague replies. And when I pushed a little harder, she bailed on the call, which made me even more suspicious. I sat there afterward, frustrated and trying to figure out what to do next. Then, out of nowhere, Tara called me back. She said she needed to be sure that whatever she told me wouldn't come back to her. I promised it wouldn't. After a long pause, she finally shared what she knew. Apparently, my wife had gotten pretty close with a guy named Brandon, someone she'd met through work. Tara didn't have all the details, but from what she'd gathered, Brandon was deeply involved in the advice my wife was getting about the divorce. The moment I heard his name, everything started to click. It wasn't about her needing space or finding herself anymore. This was about someone else being in her ear, steering the whole thing. And I needed to find out why. I knew I had to handle it my own way. So that Sunday, I drove over to her apartment complex and parked a block away. I wanted to see for myself what I already suspected. A few hours passed, and then I saw them, her and Brandon, walking out of the building together. They weren't holding hands or doing anything obvious, but the way they moved, close, leaning in to talk, it was more than enough. They got into his car and drove off, leaving me just sitting there, staring at the spot where they'd been. I didn't follow them. I didn't have to say anything. By then, it was obvious. She hadn't just fallen out of love with me. She'd been gearing up to leave for someone else, and suddenly, everything clicked into place. The emotional distance that came out of nowhere, the weird conversations about money, the way she started making demands like she was calling the shots, and then the divorce papers. She wasn't just leaving me, she was trying to strip me of everything. And the whole time, she had someone by her side. That night, I went home with my head spinning, trying to process everything I just discovered. The betrayal cut deep, but what hurt even more was realizing how deliberate it all was. She had been using the divorce like a stepping stone to the new life she was building with Brandon. But what she didn't know was, I had something lined up too. From the moment we stepped into that first mediation session, things felt tense. Her lawyer showed up carrying a binder that looked like it belonged in a high-stakes corporate lawsuit. He started listing her demands like they were perfectly reasonable. Half the house, the bank accounts, my stuff, the car, and even some nonsense about spousal support. I sat quietly, pretending to listen, but I was just waiting for my attorney to play his hand. When our turn finally came, my lawyer calmly slid a pile of documents across the table and said, "Before we move forward, I think everyone should take a look at these." Her lawyer grabbed the papers and started flipping through them. His confident demeanor faded fast as he read page after page, his expression growing more serious with each one. "What is this?" he asked, looking across the table at my attorney. "These are records of asset transfers," my lawyer said smoothly. "My client legally moved all major assets into a trust under his mother's name. The transfers were finalized several weeks before the divorce was filed. The trust is binding, and it's not reversible." The room went dead silent. Her attorney turned to her, clearly frustrated. "You didn't tell me about this," he said flatly. She ripped the papers from his hands and skimmed through them herself, her face turning red as she read the notarized signatures and official dates. "This can't be real," she muttered, staring in disbelief. Then she looked at me, her expression shifting from shock to pure anger. "You planned this," she said, like I'd just done something unspeakable. "You knew I was going to file, and you did this just to screw me over." I didn't say a word. I just sat there and let the truth settle in. Her lawyer, clearly shaken, asked mine to explain further, and he did slowly, thoroughly, laying out every detail to make it airtight. The dates lined up perfectly. The signatures were legit, notarized and all. The whole thing had been done by the book, long before she ever handed me divorce papers. There was nothing they could do to undo it. She was livid. "You're unbelievable," she snapped, leaning across the table. "I can't believe you do this to me." I didn't respond. What was the point? This wasn't me trying to hurt her. This was me protecting myself because she had made it clear she wasn't walking away without a fight. The session wrapped up with her lawyer muttering something about needing to revisit their strategy. But everyone in that room knew they were out of options. When we stepped out of the building, she pulled me aside in the hallway. Her face was a mix of anger and desperation. "This isn't over," she said, her voice low and tight. "You're going to regret this." I just looked at her and said, "The only thing I regret is ever trusting you." Things spiraled faster than I expected after that mediation. She completely unraveled. The calls started pouring in, not just 2 or 3, but nonstop. At first, she sounded calm, like she was trying to make peace. Her voicemails were full of lines like, "I think we just need to talk," or "I know things got out of hand, but we can fix this." But when I didn't respond, her tone shifted fast. By the second day, her messages were swinging wildly, crying one moment, screaming the next. One voicemail would be her sobbing, talking about how she messed up and didn't want to lose what we had. The next would be her raging, accusing me of being greedy and heartless, blaming me for every bad thing in her life. I ignored it all. My lawyer told me to keep my distance, and honestly, I didn't need convincing. I was done with her games. But clearly, she wasn't done with mine. When the calls and texts didn't work, she started spinning lies. I began hearing from mutual friends that she was telling people the whole divorce was fake, that it was some elaborate prank or staged drama. I mean, seriously? Who would believe that? It didn't take long before people started poking holes in her story. Friends began asking the obvious questions: if it's a prank, why did you file real legal documents, or why hire a lawyer and go after property if it wasn't serious? When folks didn't buy into her fantasy, she just doubled down, insisting it was all part of some ridiculous plan. She told me this wasn't some kind of joke, it was a way to test how strong our relationship really was. Then she flipped the narrative, casting herself as the victim. She said my reaction had deeply hurt her, that I'd crossed the line and shattered the trust in our marriage. And for a while, it seemed like a few people actually bought into her story. I started getting weird messages and offhand comments from people I barely talked to, stuff like, "Wow, I had no idea she was going through so much." Even her brother came at me with, "You should have just talked things through instead of going nuclear." It was frustrating as hell, but I kept calm, knowing the truth would eventually surface. And it did, all thanks to a mutual friend. Let's call him Derek. We weren't super tight or anything, but we'd always been cool with each other. A couple of weeks after the mediation, Derek reached out to me out of the blue. He said there was something I really needed to see. When we met up, he pulled out his phone and showed me a string of text messages between her and Brandon. At first, I didn't get it. I asked, "How did you even get your hands on these?" That's when Derek explained that he and Brandon had a mutual friend, someone who had overheard a few of their conversations. Apparently, this guy started getting uneasy about the whole situation, especially when Brandon started bragging about helping her secure her future. It didn't take long for that friend to connect the dots and realize that securing her future meant draining me dry. Feeling guilty for keeping quiet, the guy took screenshots of the texts and passed them on to Derek, thinking he had a better shot at getting through to me. "This dude's been playing both sides," Derek told me, shaking his head. He went on to explain that Brandon had been pumping her up to bleed me for everything I had, all while making her believe he'd be there for her afterward. Derek handed me the messages and said, "Man, you didn't deserve this. I figured you had the right to know." The messages were brutal. She wasn't just venting about the divorce, she was actively planning her next moves with Brandon, and he was coaching her through it. One of her messages read, "Once the settlement's done, we'll have everything we need. I just need him to agree to the terms." Brandon answered back, "Don't back down. Guilt him if you have to. He owes you. Once you got the money, we start over." I just sat there, staring at Derek's phone, trying to process what I was reading. This wasn't about a fight or a breakdown in communication, this was cold, calculated manipulation. I thanked Derek before he left, but my mind was spinning. Suddenly, everything clicked. The way she'd pulled away from everyone, her obsession with money, the extreme demands during the divorce, it had all been part of the scheme she was cooking up with Brandon behind my back. Those messages started making their way through our circle of friends. Derek shared them with a few people and they spread fast. Just like that, her version of the story started to unravel. People who had been on her side, or at least kept their distance, suddenly started seeing her for who she really was. Even the ones who defended her at first began backing away. The shift happened almost overnight. By the time the divorce was final, she was left with just her personal belongings. Her attorney quietly dropped her complaint after realizing it didn't have any legal legs to stand on. All the outrageous demands she'd made crumbled when I brought forward the documentation I had and the trust between me and my mom. Rock solid. Brandon disappeared the second everything started falling apart. Honestly, I wouldn't be shocked if he used her the same way she tried to use me. From what I could gather, he'd been feeding her this fantasy of freedom and a fresh start, but when it became clear she wasn't walking away with anything, he bailed. Without Brandon backing her up, she lost all her bravado. She kept calling and texting, but the tone completely changed. It was all desperation now. No more accusations. Just begging. One voicemail said, "Please, can we just talk? I'll do anything to make this right." Another said, "You don't have to forgive me, but can't we at least settle this and move on? I'll give it all up, just talk to me." I didn't answer. I couldn't. There was no going back after the damage she'd done. Even her own family started backing away. Her brother reached out at one point, apologizing for the way he'd come at me when he was still buying into her lies. "I didn't know what she was doing to you," he told me. "I'm sorry I ever took her word over yours. As for me, I got the house, I kept my savings, and I gained something I hadn't had in a long, long time, peace of mind. As always, my mom was my anchor. She showed up with paint cans and a bunch of ideas to help make the place feel like mine again. And now? Now it actually feels like my life is mine. No more overthinking every little thing. No more feeling betrayed. Just peace. She's just a closed chapter now, a part of my past I no longer revisit. And the rest of the story? That's mine to write. Thank you for watching and sticking with me through this tough story. If you made it to the end, I really appreciate it. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel.